Greetings, everybody. This is Dr. Jonathan Cox, your resident race scholar, here with another mini lecture on race. A report released by Mapping Police Violence shows that in 2020, more than 1,100 people were killed by police. And just in the first 5 months of 2021, over 400 people have been killed by police. Sadly, most of these killings actually don't begin with a call for an alleged violent crime. Instead, most killings begin with things like traffic stops, mental health checks, domestic disturbances, or reported low-level offenses. We have also seen newer trends in police violence, where police killings have decreased in cities, but increased in suburban and rural areas. Given much of the recent national and global attention on police killings of Black Americans, it should also come as no surprise that there are significant disparities with regards to race and police violence. Black and Latinx people are much more likely to be killed by police than their white counterparts. In 2020, 250 Black people and 200 Latinx people were killed by police. And again, just in the first 5 months of 2021, nearly 100 Black people and over 50 Latinx people have been killed by police. Black Americans are the most likely demographic in the US to experience police violence, with 1 in every 1,000 Black people being killed by the police. Many of you have probably heard about some of the more high-profile cases, like Philando Castile, who was shot to death in 2016 in his car by an officer in front of his girlfriend and her 4-year-old daughter, or Breonna Taylor, who was shot to death in 2020 in her home by police in the middle of the night, or George Floyd, whose murder sparked protests nationwide and globally in 2020. However, for the handful of high-profile incidents, there are hundreds that go largely unnoticed by the broader public, particularly incidents where Black women are killed by police. For instance, you may not have heard about Betty Jones, who was the neighbor of a man who called the police about a domestic disturbance. Now, Jones was killed in 2015 when she opened her door to direct police to the correct address, and they shot her accidentally. If we look more closely at the numbers, we can see that there are even bigger disparities for unarmed people killed by police. In the US, Black people are 3.5 times more likely than white people to be killed by police when they are not attacking and are unarmed. Latinx people are nearly 1.5 times more likely than white people to be killed by police, and are also more likely to be killed when they are unarmed than white people. Some people argue that where you live matters. However, data do not show this to be true. For instance, between 2013 and 2016, Orlando had the highest rate of police killings in Florida, and people were killed by Orlando police at rates that were 8 times higher than the NYPD, 3 times higher than Chicago PD, and 2 times higher than the LAPD. So then, how did we get here? Why is it that Black and Latinx people are so much more likely to be killed by police than their white counterparts? Now, one factor that we could look at in the disproportionate killing of Black and Latinx people by police is implicit bias. Now, for example, researchers have investigated the role of race in seeing Black. In other words, how race impacts thoughts, visualizations, and thus actions. Now, studies show that police officers are quicker to see weapons in the hands of Black people than they are white people, whether there is actually a weapon there or not. Now, studies also show that police officers are significantly quicker to direct their attention to Black people over white people when they are thinking about crime. Now, these results hold true across race, meaning the race of the officer does not matter. Predominantly Black and Latinx communities are also over-policed, which means law enforcement is more often looking for criminal activity in these areas. Now, I highly suggest reading Michelle Alexander's book, The New Jim Crow, for more information on mass incarceration and policing. Now, in this book, Alexander explains how police departments are often incentivized to find crime in certain areas. Another aspect of the overcriminalization of people of color can be seen in our media and the information that we consume. For example, researchers have found that Black and Latinx people are disproportionately portrayed as criminal suspects in news stories. More specifically, Blacks were nearly 2.5 times and Hispanics over 5.5 times more likely to be presented in roles as criminal suspects than whites. Evidence also supports the fact that people of color are 4 times as likely to be portrayed in news stories as suspects than as victims of crime. And this is something that does not happen for white people. Now, the media often rely on different practices when covering crimes involving blacks, Hispanics, Asians, or Muslims. Now, as suspects, they are quickly characterized as terrorists and thugs motivated purely by evil intent, while white suspects are often described as lone wolves, right? Violent acts that were created by one angry white person. Biases and perceptions about criminality also have consequences beyond police officers. Now, civilians, as part of the general public, also use these stereotypes and beliefs to justify the killing of black men and other people of color as well. We can look at this in terms of stand your ground laws. Stand your ground simply means that you have the right to use deadly force to defend yourself against another person if you fear for your life or if you fear for the life of someone else. Unfortunately, however, this law is not equally applied at all, particularly for black people. Now, in stand your ground states, when a white person kills a black person, there is more than a 350% likelihood that that killing will be viewed as justified as compared to when a white person kills another white person. However, when a black person kills anyone, white or black, there is an inverse association, far less than a 0% likelihood that this will be seen as a justified killing. Now, it seems that, at least based on how the laws are applied, black people do not have the same right to defend themselves against those who would seek to do them harm as white people do. We also see the impacts of pervasive negative stereotyping of black Americans that occurs before police even enter the scene or outside of situations in which deadly force is used with everyday citizens. Now, a recent manifestation of this that is being highlighted more often is when white Americans have called the police on black Americans for benign activities. Now, we've seen examples of white Americans calling police on black people for sitting in Starbucks, selling water in a park, barbecuing, golfing too slowly, moving into their own apartment, taking a nap, using the pool at a hotel in which they were staying, bird watching in Central Park, and finally, bargain shopping. Yes, 2 CVS employees called the police on a black woman because they thought the coupon she was using was fraudulent. Now, before you chuckle too hard, remember, the fatal encounter that happened to George Floyd started all because somebody accused him of using a fraudulent $20 bill. Now, this is only a tiny number of the examples of racial profiling that occurs for black people, without even discussing racial profiling that regularly occurs for other people of color as well. Now, these are all examples of weaponizing the police against people of color. When you combine stereotypes of criminality with the fact that Black and Latino people are disproportionately more likely to have force used against them by the police, you end up creating even more dangerous situations for Black Americans and other people of color that could result in their serious injury or even death. Finally, there are also significant issues with accountability for police officers involved in the use of excessive force or killings. We do see officers charged, but these are very rare occurrences, and many only happen after extreme external pressure. For instance, the officer who killed George Floyd, Derek Chauvin, was eventually arrested and charged with second-degree murder after ongoing public outcries. However, there was also video evidence and multiple eyewitness accounts. Now, the case of Breonna Taylor shows us what happens much more typically. Now, even after months of public outrage and calls for accountability, none of the officers involved in her death were charged with killing her. In fact, the only officer charged was charged with wanton endangerment for shooting into Breonna's neighbor's apartment, not for his role in her death. Data show us that only about 4 out of every 100 officers who killed somebody between 2013 and 2020 were charged with a crime, and only 1 out of every 100 were actually convicted. Oh, and by the way, these numbers are for all people killed by police. The disparity in convictions is even more pronounced if you were to look at whether or not officers are charged and convicted for killing Black and Latino people. This is all just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the issues that we see at the intersection of policing and race in the United States. Hopefully now you have a slightly better grasp of the impacts of prejudice, bias, and systemic racism for this topic. As always, I encourage you to do some more investigation on your own to keep learning. Thank you.